Hello, and welcome to the Product Insiders LinkedIn Live series, in which we interview product leaders and learn how they leveraged customer insights to navigate tough product decisions. I'm your host, Zach Lyons, managing partner of Agile Innovation Advisors. And if you're joining us live today, can you please enter where you are from in the chat so we know who is with us? Today, our special guest is J.K. Venkatesh, Senior Director of Product Data Engineering at Capital One. We'll be asking J.K. questions about his product decisions, but if you have any specific questions for him, please enter them in the chat and we'll get to them in a bit. So with that, let's begin. J.K., thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me here, Zach. Looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Me too. So my first question for you, JK, is just to set the background a little bit. And thinking about a product decision, preferably a tough product decision that you've had to navigate, can you please tell us a little bit about your role at the time and what the situation was?
Yeah. So this was some time ago. This was at PayPal. Many of you guys know PayPal. I was a data manager. I was leading product data analytics for them. And much of my role was around merchant data analytics, understanding processing of data, where people fall off. And this particular situation was with one of our retail products called PayPal Here. And the specific situation is that, we had a go-no-go decision to make. And I was not a product manager, and the product manager was, off, and we had a lot of, absent roles at that point. So the story is going to be, how did we make the decision? What got into that decision? What were the jobs done concept that we, always talk about, Zach? What was used there? And then, if I do it all over again, 10 years after, how would I do it all over differently?
Awesome. Okay. So you teased us with that. So maybe tell us then, JK, a little bit, what was the challenge or issue you were trying to overcome, or what was difficult about the decision you had to make?
Yeah, the biggest decision to make was to either get the product out with a certain number of features that we heard from merchants as important, or risk the competitors putting out their products so that we can build a more robust product and get it out 2 months later. It was about 4 sprints, about 2 months later. In the grand scheme of things, you might look at it from a vantage and say 2 months is not a big deal, but when you're launching a first of a kind product, that 2 months could need all the leeway, the runway that your competitor gets. It was a very hard decision to make, but we did make certain decisions, and we had data backing it up. And I'm happy to talk about what the data was and what kind of results happened because of that. And we can also talk about how would we do it differently if I were to do it now.
So you had a trade-off between more robust product, but a few months later versus a more of an MVP that maybe you could get out more earlier. Interesting. See a trade-off that a lot of product managers have to make all the time. So, what did you do? Like, how did you help make that decision, or what insights did you get to help you inform that?
So we basically, and this is, you love this, Zach, the jobs to be done interview was actually specifically done for both local dealers and existing PayPal merchants that would potentially be using this product. And we started listing what were the tasks to be done for them to take on mobile payments. And there was about, at that time, if I remember it right, there was about a dozen things that were important for them. And 4 of them were critical. And the criticality of these were dependent on a lost sale. You're going in, you're getting this $50 art from a garage sale, and when you go for the garage sale, you missed your wallet. You don't have cash, right? So that is the opportunity we were capitalizing on. And the most important thing that was needed for that is a transaction mechanism that would take anything other than cash, card, or wallet transactions or whatnot, right? Back in 2013, 14, this was not this pervasive as we have right now. It's like, oh, give me a Venmo or Zelle. It was not that pervasive. So they needed something to break that mold. Now, what is needed in addition to that? If this is a transaction you're buying for a business, there is receipt needed. If there is tax purposes, there's taxing needed. There is local sales taxes, all of the things around it, right? But the most important pressing need was to make that payment, get it from a customer who's not carrying cash. And that is what led to the launching of the product, even though it didn't have three major functions. Function number one was invoicing. Function number two was receipting, which could sound important. Function number three is email communication back and forth. If I got this product and I don't know you, now I want to contact you, I got it from a random garage sale, I just paid you this, how do I reach back to you? So these three were on the stake list of what would make it and what wouldn't make it. And we could take one because it was, we had one sprint time, we could take one of the three. The other two had to be sacrificed so that we could launch it in a V1, V2 after the launch. The biggest way we could get to the decision of what would stay and what would not is what was important for the merchant. What was important for the merchant is, from what we got from the task done, is the confirmation that the transaction was done. So in the grand scheme of things, the communication, the invoicing, all of that, I come to your house, I got this off your garage. The most important piece that was needed there was to get the confirmation that Zach paid $45 for the art that was on my wall. Here is a confirmation that you paid $45, and that closes the transaction. Everything else can be kind of, you want something about my address? Sure, I'll text you my address. So we basically went down to what would be something that would stop the transaction, what would be something that would be luxury for the transaction. So we broke it in two parts, and then we took a hard call to prioritize just invoicing, receipting, and invoicing and messaging was kept on the back burner.
So, I got to ask you, you mentioned jobs to be done. You figured out the number one need was confirmation that the transaction had gone through. So can you walk us a little bit through how you found out that? Like, what did you do? What questions did you ask merchants, or what insights did you get to figure that out?
So one of the things that when we interviewed the local merchants in San Francisco Bay Area that were the largest base for this product at that time, the thing they said is, when you give cash, even when you give cash, there is a little bit of a doubt in did the transaction go through? Did they buy the cash? They're getting it from 20 people. What if this guy calls me and says, oh, did you pay me? Like, did you give me this money? I know you got the art from me. So even with the cash transaction, there was a missed opportunity for the merchant to confirm to the customer that the sale was made and then I got the money and you got what you needed, right? So that was a problem for the customers. More than the merchant, it was for the customers. So I got something for you. I got a receipt, and if it's a personal transaction, I have a receipt. If it's a business transaction, I need it for expense or whatnot. We were solving for a problem that even with traditional cash transactions, this would be a problem. So it was a universal problem, and the way they said it, the way we found it was, we spoke about what would be deadly stops for a transaction from happening. Like, what would the three top things be that would stop your transaction from happening? This was the first one that basically said, oh, people do not show up with, they always do not have cash. And if they do not have cash, the transaction stops them. So we're trying to solve for that. And we're trying to also say that this task is going to be marked done, so that the transaction can be closed. So that's how we came to this.
So very interesting. So you dug in and said, okay, what are the top reasons? What would stop this transaction from going through? What are the top reasons? And you found out that was number one. And I'm curious, did you expand from there in your insights? Like, did you look at more of the transaction from end to end, or were you more focused just on that? Like, what would stop the transaction?
Yeah, so great question. The data guy in me always looks at the merchant has said it. 80% of the merchants have said it. What does the data say? So once you do a transaction and from traditional PayPal, an email gets sent out saying, email transaction, this is the email. So we looked at the open rate of the transaction emails. It was in the 99 point something in a 7-day period. So pretty much everyone who finished a transaction, they were backing it up by looking at the transaction receipt every time they finished it. That's not just that. There was always, every time there was a return or anything requested, the first thing that came in was attach a receipt. I know now it's a very, very connected transactional system. You know, your invoices and receipts are all stored in Square and PayPal. Back then it was not, right? So one of the biggest things was if for any reason the transaction were to be audited or to be relooked at in case of a return or a purchase questionnaire that needs to come up. Again, the first point that it needs to come to becomes the receipt. So receipt not only finalizes the transaction, it also becomes the golden service record for pretty much everything around that transaction. That is why we ended up doubling down on transactions.
I see. So it has an impact on a lot of downstream. I can imagine too. I know chargebacks, those types of things, right? You can have as well. So having a receipt is proof. So
Yeah.
this was actually an insight then from through the merchant about what the customer wanted. So it was almost, you guys were B2B, right? You were selling your product to merchants, but merchants were saying this is a thing that their customers wanted. So a B2B to C.
Yeah. So, we're in Capital One here. Every company that I worked for, including PayPal, the one thing that I loved about, these companies is they were obsessed with customers. PayPal was obsessed with customers. This was, in fact, how this turned up was an interesting fact. So my boss used to do local merchant visits, and she basically did this on her personal time, and she'd go solve for their sales needs, solve for their how do you increase your sales. She'll be their personal growth hacker, but she won't get paid for it outside of PayPal salary, right? And I did a ride along with her, and this actually came out of one of those conversations. And we were like, oh, by the way, we are doing this product and we have this, prioritization question. Then I started digging in. And, getting specifics. And I started using that as a line of questioning for other merchants. But to answer your question, we used to do a lot of road shows and empathy visits for our merchants, eBay merchants, non-eBay merchants, individual sellers. And this came up from one of the largest SMB merchants for PayPal, and that became a more, a deeper line of questioning based on that Q&A.
So interesting. So you did the ride, follow along with your manager who actually just went like on weekends or evenings and went and visited merchants on her own time to ask questions, to get insights, to help her obviously with her day job. But
which will help her with her day job, but there's also a nuanced point about it. If you are Zach, you and I have spoken about this at length. When you are a true product manager, the 9 to 5 does not stop you, right? You are obsessed with the product. You are obsessed with how the customer is using the product. She was one of them. She was basically trying to get, so you're selling your art, you're doing this, what stops you? And if the merchant thought that this was annoying, he would have cut it off right there. The fact that this became a coffee chat and this became a weekend chat, he calls me now for like, oh, I'm trying to build this. There's another example. The same merchant came to us and said, we are now getting $3,000, $4,000 art. And the biggest problem we have is people want to pay in payments. I'm actually doing my own like personal, split payment setup. Do you have products? And she called me right away. It's like, oh, we got Bill Me Later. So we should be like selling Bill Me Later to them all right through. And turns out they were one among the pilot customers that were selected. Now, obviously, we had some thresholds on how much we can fund each of the customers depending on their profile. But if you look at the buy now, Bill Me Later program, it was actually by the Bill Me Later product that we acquired back in 2012. That became the basis for pretty much every large transaction that couldn't be funded right there. That also came out of a specific empathy session on how we can integrate it with PayPal Pro.
Very interesting. But it seems very serendipitous. Like you're just having conversations and then these things come out. Or were you actively looking for something? Did you have a set of questions that you were probing around to specifically get to that? I'm just curious how you found that out.
There's a mix of both. there is open empathy sessions where we kind of want them to express freely what they're going through, even if it's not related to PayPal, right?
Mm.
And sometimes, when I wear my product manager hat for PayPal here, I've done this a lot. We go in there specifically asking, you abandoned these types of transactions. Why did you do that? Is there something better we could do? Is this something that you can answer to us? Was it something with the app that prevented you from doing this? People are talking about form factor of the specific device that goes into the 3mm jack, and it's fascinating that the amount of R&D that is done on the actual form factor on that was actually getting evolved every time we got feedback from the customers on, oh, I'm wearing this little sleeve over my iPhone so it won't go all the way through. So can you make a ridge that will make sure that even if it goes through, it doesn't have to be lodged all the way in for it to take the transaction? That was the feedback that went into the product. So it is a combination, Zach. It was a combination of things that we want, because we don't want the customers to every time just answer the questions we have. What if we completely lose view of a problem that they have and that never comes out because my line of questioning is just straight up like this? So we always want to have that peripheral vision that can give them the ability to give answers and feedback that is beyond our line of questioning.
Great point. Yep. Allowing open-ended, as we said, serendipitous answers, things that you didn't expect, but also probing for certain areas that you had questions about, like the form factor of the device for swiping cards.
And we'll always be open also, Zach. Even now, in my job, I do this. If a customer tells me that this is a feature that I want, I want to take crypto payments, I'm going to say, let me look into it, right? I can see it. But, ultimately, at the end of the day, the company might decide, crypto is too risky for us. We're not getting there. It is also important for me as a product manager and a company's representative to go back to the customer and the merchant or the dealer and say, you gave me this feedback. I've done my due diligence on this. At this point, we're not going to take this feedback in, but we have it in our back burner. And as time becomes appropriate for us, we'll get it back again. So that way they know that the feedback they gave, one, was acted upon and was, done due diligence on. And two, they also know the decision that, they don't have to be expecting this from them because for now we're tabling it.
Love it. Closing the loop with the customer. That's great. So curious what happened, JK. What was the result? You gathered this insight. You found out about the buy now, pay later interest. It sounds like that was probably early on, even before a lot of the companies had launched in that area.
Yeah.
So did you guys act on that? Like what happened as a result of your insights?
So the buy now, pay later insight actually became a very material one for how we wanted to roll out Bill Me Later, right? Without getting into the operational specifics of how PayPal integrates Bill Me Later, the point there was that there was a large initiative to have Bill Me Later as an integrated product for all of PayPal's offerings. And if you go to, this is public information, if you go to PayPal right now, Bill Me Later is actually offered, I think pretty much across the board, or at least on the higher end products, right? PayPal Pro and, I don't know if the categorizations are still the same. For most of the offerings that have merchants selling products over, I think, $300 or something, there's a threshold for that. Bill Me Later right now is a default. It is integrated across all of them. And the data also showed that close rate was 2x. For a product that was over $300, when you give financing for it, the close rate of the purchase, from cart to, adding cart to selling the cart to buying the product was actually 2x. And I know that number went up across the industry in the last 10 years. I don't know, I've not kept track of what that number is. But initial read was able to tell us that the sample population we took was for RC, remote controlled hobby stores.
Sure.
Right? We had about 300 stores or something, and we looked at a test population that was a holdout population that did not have Bill Me Later, and a population that had Bill Me Later. And for RC planes, $100, we looked at the lift, and that lift was over 2x. I think it was like 3x or something. We were able to very clearly articulate the difference in the A/B test of what would happen if there is no bill me later to what would happen if there is bill me later. And with all differences, noise down to zero, we would do an A/B test, in some cases ABC test, to see if you give full funding, what would happen? If you give partial funding, what will happen? If you give no funding, what will happen? And we'll measure the lift. And we kept it as a routine test at that point for PayPal Pro.
So the buy now, pay later became sort of integrated in the product, it sounds like. But
Yep.
yet it's interesting because other companies, obviously over the last 10 years, Affirm, Klarna, a bunch of these others have sort of dominated the space. I guess the question, but why didn't PayPal sort of become the dominant player in that, do you think?
That's a great question. I think their volume even now is pretty big. I cannot talk about public volume. I don't know what the public volume for bill me later is, but because it's it's probably reported under the PayPal umbrella, maybe it doesn't have a separate number. I know for a fact that for eBay transactions, bill me later is a pretty big deal even now. If I were to, sit at it from, look at it from outside and say why it was not a big of a success, as compared to other products, I think it's a subjective thing, but I would say that partnerships was probably the one thing lacking at that point. If we had closed the loop with Best Buy and all the other, large merchants where you have larger ticket transactions, and kind of put this as the first way to fund larger transactions with zero interest, I think that would have been a great game changer. Whether it did it or not, I don't know. I was not on the partnership team. If you look at the largest commercial successes for pay now, buy now, pay later programs, they're all working behind the scenes. You don't even hear them. Like, I got some of the cards from Best Buy in the past. Some bank behind the scenes operated it, but I didn't even know what the bank was, because Best Buy got it fully integrated to a point where they said, Best Buy is giving you 18 months to pay for your home theater system. Don't worry about everything else. And you go to Best Buy account and there's a credit section. You can log into the credit section and you can pay it. And if you pay it in 18 months, there's no interest. I think the seamlessness of integration is the key to winning there.
Oh, I see. So PayPal maybe just missed the opportunity to partner with these retailers and white label or even co-brand those types of offerings, so they're in the background where some other firms did. It's interesting. Well, that actually leads me to the last question, and just thinking back on your whole experience, right? So the questions, the ride along, the serendipitous finding, if you look back and we're going to do something like this again, like what would you do differently? What did you learn as a result of your experience?
Yeah, I think the biggest learning for me is I started with the customer's need list on the left, and I started with I'm going to hit all of the list. If there are 18 things in the list, I'm going to hit all of them, right? If I were to do this all over again, the thing that I'd push on is, of the 18 things, there are 3 things that are critical for you, super critical for you. Backing that up with data, what would be the 3 things? I think I didn't do that last time because up to that 18 list or whatever the number was, I had the bandwidth to do it. It finally came down to the last 3 because we were kind of running short of data, right? If I look at it now, when I say instead of the 18, only 10 had to be done, who knows? I could have launched it like 4 months in advance and beat the competition probably by a good 2 quarters. I think the biggest learning I have is not everything that the customer or the business on the other side using the systems want, say that they want, is always crucial. There are 5, 10 things in there that are like business critical. Everything else is luxury. Getting it, tagging it to ensure that what are the must-haves and know what are the good-to-haves would be the best starting point for any product manager.
So very much a relentless prioritization of what to go do. Even if you have the bandwidth to do more, it's still being very focused on what really matters, I guess, to the customer, but also to the business, or a combination of both.
Sometimes that 2 sprints, beating your competitor by 2 sprints, like 1 month, could make all the difference, right? And if you sit here and say, "Oh, I've set the date, I don't, until that date I'm good." What if your competitor says, "You know what? I'm going to do my version of ruthless prioritization. Let me beat them to the punch by another 2 weeks." There you go. You got a last opportunity right there.
Fascinating. What a really interesting story, JK. Appreciate your telling that and sharing it with us. I do want to see if any questions for those listening live. And I will remind folks that even if you're not listening live, you're listening to this later, a week from now, 2 weeks from now, whatever, you can still post comments. This will be up on LinkedIn. It'll act like any other post, so we can continue the conversation in the chat. But we're obviously happy to accommodate any questions you have today. I know there is sometimes a little lag, so even if we end the session, you have a question, we'll get to it. But that does conclude our sort of questions for JK, at least the ones that I have. And I hope that you guys learned at least one new thing from the conversation. I know I did. And for those of you who have been with us on this journey, I will remind everyone to stay tuned for future Product Insiders events. They will be here on LinkedIn as we have just done with JK. So stay tuned to those. I do want to see if any questions have come in. I'm looking, but I don't see anything coming in. So maybe we answered everyone's question today, which that means we did a great job being very thorough. So with that, I will just say until next time, I am your host, Zach Lyons with Agile Innovation Advisors. I hope everyone has a great week. And again, JK, thank you so much for being with us today.
Zach and Product Insiders team, thank you so much for having me. It was fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.